I had to cancel 3 shows and they knocked my back out of place. I got to walk with a cane. I got to sit down when I perform. And I just think it's wrong. I knew a side of Dave most people never got to see. That was the raw text Kid Rock posted the very morning the world changed. On Wednesday, April 29, 2026, around 5 o'clock in the afternoon inside a sterile intensive care unit, David Allan Coe took his final breath. He was 86 years old. The exact cause of death was never disclosed to the public, as his family kept that agonizing detail strictly private. His widow, Kimberly, confirmed the loss the next day to Rolling Stone, calling him one of the best singers, songwriters, and performers of our time, a man never to be forgotten. She wrote that he was her husband, her friend, her confidant, and her entire life for many years, vowing that she would never forget him and that she did not want anyone else to forget him either. But here's where the story gets strange. For more than 50 years, this man stood directly at the doors of country music's most sacred buildings, singing into rooms he was never fully allowed to enter. He played the legendary Grand Ole Opry, yet they never made him a member. He wrote the actual songs that became the definitive soundtrack of working-class America, but the Country Music Hall of Fame never inducted him. He died exactly as he lived, on the absolute outside of the institution, with the door not quite closed and not quite open. So why did the establishment fear him so much? The answer will surprise you. To understand why the mainstream kept him locked out, you have to start where he started, and where he started was nowhere good. David Allan Coe was born on September 6, 1939, in the gritty town of Akron, Ohio. His parents divorced when he was just a child, and the household by every account was completely broken and deeply unhappy. The boy who would one day be crowned the king of the outlaws grew up in a rough working-class neighborhood listening to rhythm and blues, not country music. Country was something he found much later, the exact same way he found everything else in his life. The hard way. By the time he was only 9 years old, the legal system had already decided exactly what he was. The court declared him legally incorrigible, which was the clinical language of the day for a child the authorities had completely given up on. He was shipped off to a reform school in Michigan at 9 years old, and from that exact moment forward, for the next 2 decades of his life, the walls of his world were cold institutional concrete. He survived juvenile detention, reformatories, and max security prisons like the Ohio State Penitentiary, wearing numbers like 60,599 and 62,424 pinned to his shirt. You do not forget the number they force you to wear when you are a teenager. Yet, what happened inside those cells would completely change American music forever. His documented charges across his youth were possession of burglary tools, auto theft, and possession of indecent materials. Crucially, none of his actual convictions were for violent crimes. But inside those walls, music became his literal survival tool, a place where no guards could touch him. He taught himself guitar, influenced by fellow inmate and legendary rhythm and blues singer Screamin' Jay Hawkins. Coe later admitted that he never would have made it through prison without his music, because even when they put him in solitary confinement with absolutely nothing to do, he could still build a song inside his own head. But when he finally walked out of those prison gates for the last time in 1967, he had absolutely nothing. No record deal, no connections, and no money. So he chose the only place that made sense for a man with a stack of raw songs and nowhere else to go. He went to Nashville, and he lived out of a red Cadillac hearse. He parked the vehicle directly in front of the Ryman Auditorium, painted his name on the side with the words, "Support the Grand Ole Opry," and used it as his home, his stage, and his calling card. He would step out onto the curb, work up a sweat busking for tourists, and sign autographs for people who assumed he was a major star performing inside. He was literally on the outside looking in, but what happened next caught the industry completely off guard. Eventually, the noise he was making outside the building could no longer be ignored. He was signed to a label, releasing his debut album Penitentiary Blues in 1970, which filled the airwaves with raw, unvarnished prison memories rather than polished metaphors. He refused to sand down his jagged edges to fit Nashville's clean conventions, but he possessed a brilliant gift the town desperately needed. He could write a massive hook. By 1973, a 15-year-old girl named Tanya Tucker recorded a tender ballad he wrote called, "Would You Lay With Me in a Field of Stone," and it shot straight to #1. Suddenly, Every major executive on Music Row wanted to know who this tattooed ex-con writing beautiful poetry was. Columbia Records snatched him up, pairing him with legendary producer Billy Sherrill. But instead of accepting the polished, orchestral sound of the era, Coe gave them the opposite. He transformed into the mysterious rhinestone cowboy, walking onto stages in flashy rhinestone suits gifted by Mel Tillis, wearing a mysterious black mask over his eyes like the Lone Ranger so he could protect his private identity. The hits started piling up instantly. His recording of "You Never Even Called Me by My Name" became a massive top 10 hit and a permanent jukebox anthem across America. But then, he did something that sabotaged his career completely. In 1977, Coe wrote a song that would become the ultimate anthem of working-class frustration. "Take This Job and Shove It." He handed it to Johnny Paycheck, who blasted it straight to #1 on the charts, turning it into a multi-genre pop culture phenomenon that factory workers and truck drivers adopted as their personal battle cry. Yet, as always, someone else was getting famous off his genius while Coe stood off to the side in the shadows. He was the first artist to ever record the iconic song, "Tennessee Whiskey," back in 1981, decades before Chris Stapleton turned it into the highest certified country track in history. Coe saw the magic in the music before anyone else, but the industry simply refused to let him take the glory home. He made his debut on the Grand Ole Opry stage, standing in the famous wooden circle, but the moment his set was over, they ushered him right back out to the parking lot and locked the door behind him. Why? Because the darker side of Allan Coe was beginning to merge with the legend. He independently released underground, highly explicit, and deeply offensive mail-order albums that shocked the establishment and stained his reputation in ways that would never fade. Critics labeled him a dangerous pariah, and the mainstream quarantine became permanent. But here is the secret he kept hidden until the very end. Behind closed doors, Coe maintained a private list of 7 legendary musicians who had crossed him so deeply that forgiveness never came. He carried these brutal, unfiltered grudges for decades, sharpened by jealousy, betrayal, and the scars of the outlaw country wars. The first name on his list was the most shocking of all, Willie Nelson. To the public, Willie and Coe were brothers in the outlaw movement, but Coe secretly despised how easily Nelson became the smiling face of rebellion while Coe was left fighting for scraps on the fringes. He believed Willie played the corporate game, turning rebellion into profitable merchandise, while completely erasing Coe from the history books when the Highwaymen formed. The second name was Garth Brooks, whom Coe despised as the absolute corporization of country music, accusing him of turning a raw art form into a sanitized stadium circus act. The third name was Chris Christopherson, whom Coe viewed as an intellectual gatekeeper who looked down on him and actively kept him out of the inner circle of country legends. The fourth name was George Jones, whom Coe branded a backstabber for cashing in on his songs while mocking him behind his back. The fifth was Hank Williams Jr., whom Coe dismissed as a wealthy poser wearing an outlaw costume without ever paying real dues in a prison cell. The final names were Johnny Cash and Waylon Jennings, the men he once trusted as true comrades, who ultimately chose corporate solidarity and silence while Coe was pushed deep into the shadows. What they didn't realize was that Coe would outlast the very machine that tried to delete him. By the late 1980s, his commercial peak was completely gone, and Columbia Records terminated his contract. But Coe didn't stop. He hit the road, touring relentlessly for decades because the highway was the only place he felt truly alive. He married 6 times, lived a chaotic personal life, and became deeply estranged from his own son, Tyler, who would later create the acclaimed podcast Cocaine and Rhinestones. As the years rolled on, the physical bill for his hard living finally came due. He survived a near-fatal car crash in 2003, suffered severe financial ruin when the IRS targeted him for back taxes, and faced a cascade of health failures including a stroke scare and a severe battle with COVID-19 that left him dependent on supplemental oxygen. The endless road had finally let him go, forcing a slow, quiet disappearance into his Florida home. When the end finally came in that intensive care unit in 2026, the mainstream country establishment remained completely silent. The Opry didn't issue a major tribute, and the Hall of Fame merely confirmed the text of his passing. They kept the distance, exactly as they had done for half a century. But the final victory belongs to the music. You can judge his reckless choices and his dark controversies, But you cannot erase the reality that he gave working America its voice. The institutions will keep their closed circles and their shiny plaques, but the raw, unapologetic soul of the mysterious rhinestone cowboy will live forever on the radio waves, in the smoky dive bars, and in the hearts of the outsiders who never needed a building's approval to know real genius when they heard it.